Good evening. Uh, good evening, everyone. Um, so, first of all, thank you for joining in. This is going to be a short presentation, roughly 15 minutes or so, followed by Q&A. I'm assuming half an hour, 45 minutes, however long you wish. So the title of this presentation is What do Israelis look like? So actually, speaking of which, let me share the screen. I'm going to have a share screen. I'll just have a running slideshow of Israelis, kind of various images of celebrities, normal people, cross sections of society. So you can see this slideshow, or I'll turn it off after a few minutes. So the first question, of course, with this title is, who cares what Israelis look like? Okay. And the reason I bring up the look of Israelis is that Americans, Jews and Christians alike, are often surprised when they land in Israel. They expect Israelis to look like American Jews, like Jerry Seinfeld and Adam Sandler and Bernie Sanders. And then they land in Israel and they see people who look like this, like the people you see on this PowerPoint. And by the way, I picked a lot of images of soldiers simply because the army in Israel is based on a draft. And because of that, the army, more than any other public institution, is a cross-section of Israeli society. So the face of the army is the face of the society. So the reason Americans are surprised when they when they travel to Israel, in Israel, is that Americans' expectations of what Jews look like and talk like is based on Americans' experience with American Jews. Okay? The Jews that they see at the office, at school, on TV, mostly. And it just so happens that American Jews are a monoculture. The vast majority of American Jews they hail from Yiddish-speaking communities in Eastern Europe, okay, from Poland, the Baltic republics, Ukraine, Belarus, Czechoslovakia, Russia, and because of this, American Jews show a great deal of uniformity in sociological profile, skin color, cultural and political sensibilities, and religious habits, cultural heritage. By contrast, over half of Israeli Jews came to Israel from the Muslim world. Okay? Some of these other Israelis, these non-Eastern European Israeli Jews, had been in the land of Israel, the Holy Land, for thousands of years, certainly 1,000 years, also under Muslim rule. But most of them came in the mid-20th century from Africa and the Middle East, plus a contingent from Iran and Central Asia. In fact, Israel had Israel not absorbed a wave of Russian immigrants in the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed, the share of European Jews in Israel would have been only 1/3. Again, without that boost of Russian Jews coming in the 90s. So Israel surprises Americans because Israeli Jews do not look like or think like or behave like the Jews we know from our familiarity with American Jews. Okay? When you walk through Israel, most people you'll see are not white, but brown. The music you'll hear on the street and on the radio is predominantly Middle Eastern rather than Western. They're closer to what you'll hear in Greece or Turkey or Jordan or Egypt. Israeli food, likewise, is not what we in Europe and North America identify as Jewish food. Okay, there's no bagels, no lox, no kasha, kreplach, rogalach, no brisket or tongue sandwiches. You'll be hard pressed to find a Jewish deli in Israel. And if you do, it's because an American Jew opened it up. So, so instead of these Ashkenazi foods, what you'll find in Israeli street stands and kiosks and restaurants is the kind of food you'd expect to find in a Middle Eastern country. So you'll find Arab and Turkish foods, plus Jewish foods like burakas that Sephardic Jews brought with them from the lands of Islam. One telling example of this distance between what you see here and what you'll see in Israel is in religious tradition, or religious heritage, I guess is the word. American Jews are not particularly religious, and Israeli Jews also are not particularly religious. Actually, here, let me stop the PowerPoint. I think you've seen enough. Okay. So American Jews are not particularly religious. Israeli Jews are not particularly religious. However, the religious background, the religious heritage of American Jews is Reform Judaism, whereas the religious heritage of Israeli Jews is Orthodox Judaism. Now, this is a bit tricky for people to get, because I just said that they're not religious. But the point is that whether they are fully observant, lightly observant, or not observant at all, American Jews' understanding of Judaism is shaped by the sensibilities and practices of Reform Judaism, since only 10% of American Jews are Orthodox. Okay? Virtually all the Jews you know, personally or through your TV screens, are Reform. Reform or conservative, two kind of flavors of non-Orthodox Judaism. By contrast, okay, so 90%, only 10% of American Jews are Orthodox. All the rest come from this culture of Reform Judaism, and that's, those are the Jewish sensibilities that American Jews carry with them, whether or not they're observant. By contrast, Israelis' Judaism is Orthodox Judaism. Okay? Only about 3% of Israelis are Reform Jews, and virtually all of them are an American import, like bagels and Seinfeld, etc. So, so when American Jews go to Israel, it's not strange, but it's shocking to them, or it offends them, to see men and women separated at religious sites, like the Western Wall, for example. It offends them aesthetically and politically. Okay? It's just not their kind of Judaism, even if they themselves are not religious. Okay? But they know what a synagogue looks like, or how religious weddings or brises or whatever operate. And they're not used to seeing men and women segregated. The vast majority of American Jews have never seen the inside of an Orthodox synagogue. And the same is true in reverse. Israeli Jews have never seen the inside of a Reform synagogue or conservative. When Israeli Jews come to the States and visit a Reform synagogue, they find it funny because to them it looks and feels more like an Episcopalian church than a synagogue in terms of the aesthetics and the liturgy, the code of conduct, how orderly everything is in a Reform synagogue. They've never, Israeli Jews visiting the US, visiting an American synagogue, again, it just seems strange. They've never seen women wearing prayer shawls or kippah or yarmulkes. They've never seen a rabbi without a beard, let alone a female rabbi. They've never seen a Jewish choir. They've never heard a prayer recited in perfect unison, again, like you do at a church. So that's just one example of how different these two Jewish populations are. Again, they're not like Martians and Earthlings, but these are two Jewish populations that are connected by their Judaism, but one is an Ashkenazi Eastern European monoculture, and the other is a much more mixed bag with a strong presence of non-Ashkenazi Jews, Eastern Jews. I mean, Eastern meaning from the Middle East and North Africa. But again, most of us here in North America are unaware that there's a difference. That Israelis are more varied than American Jews are. And by way of comparison, consider how we Americans look at Africa. I mean, most Americans understand that Africans in Africa are different from African Americans in this country. Okay? We are aware of the fact that Africans look different than African Americans. They have different religions, different identities, different cultural and political sensibilities. And that's why we approach Africa with a healthy recognition of our own limited understanding of African affairs and African problems and nuances, etc. So most of us know that we don't know Africans or Africa that well. We recognize that knowing African Americans does not make us experts on Africa. So we approach Africa without strong convictions. And when we hear of some problem or some conflict in some African nation, we have more questions than answers or solutions. With regard to Israel, I think you'll recognize that it's very different. Okay, we used to have a teaching fellow in the political science department who he told me about how he approaches his classes on his class on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he said that he starts by giving each student a card, like a library card, and the students are instructed to answer side A, and then so side A of the card asks, do you have a strong position on this conflict? Okay. And he says that inevitably 90% of the students say yes, okay, either a strong pro-Israeli position or a strong pro-Palestinian position. And then he tells them to flip to side B, which asks 5, 6 basic factual questions on Israel and the Palestinians. Like, what is the capital of Israel? What's the capital of the Palestinian Authority? What is the West Bank? Roughly how many Israelis have been killed in terrorist attacks since its founding? Roughly how many Palestinians have been killed by Israelis since its founding? Who did the Israelis fight in their War of Independence? What land is occupied? And who were they occupied from? Like, who were they taken from? Who were the occupied territories taken from? I know, are the Palestinians Sunni or Shiites? And students are not allowed to guess as they answer these questions. They must answer only what they actually know. And I mean, he doesn't collect and grade this assignment, but the point of this exercise, the result of it, is that almost all students discover when they flip to side B that they have strong opinions about a topic that they know very little about. Okay? It reveals to them that their strong position on the conflict is based on intuition. You know, that they have, that they approach the Israeli-Palestinian conflict preloaded with prejudgments. They treat this conflict as a proxy for other conflicts on which they already have an established narrative or established framework in their minds. So maybe they're projecting the story of Americans and American Indians onto Israel and the Palestinians. Maybe it's the story, maybe they're projecting the story of European imperialism and indigenous populations. Maybe it's a story about the clash of civilizations, East versus West. Okay, maybe it's a story of whites and blacks in this country, again, projected onto some foreign population. So when they imagine Israel imagining Israel through the prism of American experience allows Americans to imagine the Arab-Israeli conflict as a conflict between white and brown. Okay? European Jews versus Middle Eastern Arabs. Okay? And going back to the question of what do Israelis look like, the reason we can think this way, the reason we can imagine the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a conflict between white and brown, between Europeans and Middle Easterners, is because we don't know that more than half the Israeli more than half of Israeli Jews are themselves brown and Middle Eastern. It's called Eastern Jews, non-European Jews, who came to Israel from the lands of Islam were different from the Jews who came from Europe. Okay, their skin color was different. They dressed and talked and prayed differently. They were oriented toward Arab culture and the Arab language rather than European culture and the Yiddish language. They listened to and sang Arab music rather than European music. They were more religious. They were conservative and traditional politically, whereas Western Jews, European Jews, were mostly on the socialist left. And specifically with regard to the Arab-Israeli conflict, these Eastern Jews, meaning again, the Jews who came from the lands of Islam, who fled to Israel from the Islamic world, these Jews have been more hawkish, more distrustful of Arab intentions, whereas European Jews in Israel, Ashkenazi Jews, have been more dovish, more accommodating, more conciliatory, and more hopeful that Arabs would be interested in peaceful coexistence with the Jewish state. Okay. So Israel is a useful and easily understandable case study of how bias and how perceiving a foreign culture through the prism of our own American experience, how this bias colors our understanding of Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I say that it's easy to understand, that it's accessible, simply because I don't need to set it up for you. All of us entered this meeting, this session, just like those students in that class I told you about with those cards. Virtually all of us are fairly confident that we have a good enough understanding of this foreign culture to judge what's going on there and to offer policy prescriptions. And I think the reason we Americans have this confidence is that when we think of Israel, we imagine a country that is full of Jews like our Jews. So I will end here, and let me close down this session and open a new session for Q&A. Okay, and I'll end it right here. Thank you very much. I'll see you on the other side of the of Zoom.